They say nothing good happens after 2 a.m. That's when the world shifts, when the familiar becomes foreign, when shadows grow teeth and silence becomes deafening. Tonight, I'm sharing 5 accounts that crossed my desk, stories from people who encountered something in those deep, dark hours when most of us are safely asleep. These aren't urban legends. These aren't creepypastas. These are the testimonies of real people who found themselves alone in the dark, facing something they couldn't explain, something that changed them forever. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. My name is Marcus, and I worked security at the Meridian office complex for 3 years. It's one of those glass towers downtown, 42 floors of corporate cubicles that empty out by 6 p.m., leaving behind nothing but the hum of computers in sleep mode and the occasional flicker of emergency lighting. The night shift was perfect for me. Good pay, minimal human interaction, and plenty of time to catch up on podcasts while making my rounds. The building had a sophisticated security system, motion sensors, cameras on every floor, electronic locks that required my key card to access. I felt safe in my little bubble of technology and routine. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. I was settling into my usual rhythm around 1:30 a.m., feet up on the security desk, scrolling through my phone while the bank of monitors cast their pale blue glow across the empty lobby. That's when I noticed something on camera 23, the one covering the west stairwell between the 15th and 16th floors. A figure stood motionless on the landing. I leaned forward, squinting at the grainy black and white image. The timestamp read 1:47 a.m. The figure appeared to be a person in dark clothing, but something about their posture seemed wrong. They stood perfectly still, facing the camera directly, as if they knew I was watching. I checked the access logs. No one had badged into the building since the cleaning crew left at midnight. No alarms, no alerts, nothing. Just this person who shouldn't exist, standing in a stairwell that should be empty. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, my heart already picking up pace. Protocol dictated that I investigate any unauthorized presence, though I'd never actually had to do it before. The elevator seemed to take forever, each floor marker lighting up with agonizing slowness. 15, 16. The hallway was dark except for the exit signs casting their red glow. I could hear my own breathing, artificially loud in the silence. The stairwell door was heavy, equipped with one of those pneumatic closers that hissed like a dying breath as I opened it. Empty. I swept my flashlight up and down the concrete steps, checking every corner where someone might hide. Nothing. The air smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solution and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. Back in the security office, I rewound the camera footage. There, 1:47 a.m., the figure appeared. I watched it for several minutes, completely motionless. Then, at 1:52 a.m., it simply vanished. Not walking away, not moving out of frame. 1 second there, the next second gone, like someone had erased them from existence. I told myself it was a glitch. Old building, older cameras, probably just a trick of light and shadow. But I kept watching that stairwell for the rest of the night, and every night after that. The figure returned exactly 1 week later. Same time, 1:47 a.m. Same camera. Same impossibly still posture. This time I didn't investigate. I sat in my chair, watching the monitor, waiting for it to disappear at 1:52. But it didn't. It stood there for 10 minutes, 15, 20. At 2:07 a.m. it moved. Just a slight turn of the head, but enough to make my blood freeze. It was looking directly into the camera, and even through the pixelated black and white feed, I could see there was something wrong with its face. The features seemed blurred, indistinct, like someone had smeared them with their thumb. I called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. We searched the entire building together. Every floor, every stairwell, every janitor's closet. Nothing. The officers took my statement with the weary patience of people who'd dealt with jumpy security guards before. Old buildings make weird shadows, the older cop said, not unkindly. Probably just your eyes playing tricks. But I knew what I'd seen. The visits became regular after that. Every Tuesday at 1:47 a.m., the figure would appear in the stairwell. Sometimes it stayed for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. It never moved during the day shift, never appeared on any other camera, just that one spot, that one time, that impossible presence that the building's sensors couldn't detect. I started bringing a personal camera to work, a high-definition unit that could record in low light. If the building's security system couldn't capture whatever this was clearly, maybe my equipment could. I set it up on Tuesday night, pointed directly at the stairwell door. 1:47 a.m. came and went. Nothing on the building cameras. Nothing on my personal camera either. But at 2:15 a.m., I heard footsteps in the lobby. Slow, deliberate steps on the polished marble floor. I looked at the monitors. Nothing. Checked all the cameras that covered the lobby. Empty. But the sound continued, growing closer to the security desk. My hand trembled as I reached for the radio. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my desk. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The silence stretched out like a physical thing, pressing against my eardrums. Then, in a voice that sounded like dried leaves scraping against concrete, "Why do you keep watching?" I quit the next morning. Told my supervisor I had a family emergency, couldn't work nights anymore. He seemed relieved. Apparently several guards before me had quit suddenly, all giving vague excuses about personal reasons. I never found out what was in that building, what it wanted, or why it chose to reveal itself only on Tuesday nights. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at 2 a.m. and the house is perfectly quiet, I hear those footsteps again, slow and deliberate, crossing the hardwood floor of my bedroom. And I wonder if some things don't stay in the places we leave them behind. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell someone what happened 3 months ago. I can't sleep anymore, not since that night, and the police won't believe me. Maybe you won't either, but I have to try. I was babysitting for the Hendersons, a nice family who lived in one of those suburban developments where every house looks the same and the streets form perfect geometric patterns. They had 2 kids, Emma, who was 8, and little Jake, who had just turned 4. I'd been watching them for about 6 months, usually on Friday or Saturday nights when Mr. and Mrs. Henderson wanted to go out for dinner or see a movie. The house was a standard 2-story colonial with a big backyard and one of those security systems that chirped whenever you opened a door or window. The kids were good. Emma was old enough to mostly take care of herself, and Jake was the kind of toddler who actually went to bed when you asked him to. Easy money for a college student like me. That Friday night started like any other. The Hendersons left around 7 p.m. for some charity gala downtown, wouldn't be back until after midnight. Emma and I watched a Disney movie while Jake played with his toy cars on the living room floor. By 9 p.m., both kids were in bed, and I settled in on the couch with my textbooks, planning to get some studying done. The house was one of those places that made little noises, the settling of wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional click of the heating system. I'd gotten used to the sounds over the months, could almost predict when the house would groan or when the ice maker would rumble to life. It was comforting in its predictability. Around 11 p.m., I heard something new, a soft tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. I looked up from my psychology textbook, listening. The sound came again, tap, 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 rhythmic and deliberate. It seemed to be coming from the sliding door that led to the backyard. I walked over to investigate, pressing my face against the glass. The backyard was dark, except for a motion sensor light near the deck that cast a small circle of illumination. I couldn't see anything unusual. No raccoons, no wind-blown branches that might explain the tapping. But as I watched, a child's ball rolled into the light. It was Jake's ball, a red rubber thing covered in cartoon characters. I remembered him playing with it earlier in the day. But Jake was upstairs, asleep in his bed, and there was no wind that could have moved the ball. The tapping came again, this time more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. I checked the security system panel by the front door. All sensors showed green, no breaches, no open windows or doors. The system was armed and functioning normally, but the tapping continued, and now it seemed to be moving, starting at the sliding door, then around the side of the house, following the line of windows. I grabbed the cordless phone, ready to call the police, but stopped. What would I say? That I heard tapping sounds and saw a ball in the backyard? They'd think I was some paranoid teenager jumping at shadows. Instead, I crept upstairs to check on the kids. Emma was sound asleep in her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and the soft glow of her nightlight. Jake's room was at the end of the hall, past a bathroom and a guest bedroom that the Hendersons used as an office. His door was open. I always closed the kids' doors after putting them to bed. It was something Mrs. Henderson had specifically asked me to do. But Jake's door stood wide open, and his room was empty. The covers were thrown back, as if he'd gotten up suddenly, and his favorite stuffed elephant lay on the floor. "Jake?" I called softly, not wanting to wake Emma. No response. I searched the upstairs quickly. Bathroom, guest bedroom, even the walk-in closet in the master bedroom where Jake sometimes hid during games of hide-and-seek. Nothing. My heart was pounding now, that sick feeling of panic rising in my throat. Downstairs, I called his name louder. "Jake, where are you, buddy?" That's when I heard him laugh. It was Jake's laugh, high and delighted, the way he sounded when someone was tickling him or playing peekaboo. But it was coming from outside, from the backyard. I ran to the sliding door, and there he was. Jake stood in the middle of the yard in his Superman pajamas, giggling and spinning in circles. The motion sensor light had clicked on, illuminating him in harsh white light that made his small form look ghostly. I slid the door open, not caring about the security system's warning beep. "Jake, what are you doing out here? How did you get outside?" He stopped spinning and looked at me with those big brown eyes that always got him out of trouble. "Playing hide and seek," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "With who, honey? There's nobody here." Jake pointed toward the darkness beyond the light's reach. "With the sad lady." Ice formed in my stomach. "What sad lady?" "She was tapping on the windows. She wanted to play. She said she's been looking for someone to play with for a really, really long time." I scooped Jake up, not caring that his feet were dirty from the yard, and carried him inside. I locked the sliding door and reset the security system, my hand shaking as I punched in the code. "Jake, listen to me. You can't go outside at night without telling me, okay? It's dangerous." He nodded solemnly, but then looked over my shoulder toward the backyard. "The sad lady is still there. She's waving." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I carried Jake upstairs and tucked him back into bed, this time closing his door firmly and even dragging a chair from his desk to prop against it. It wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to get out, but at least I'd hear the chair scrape against the floor. Back downstairs, I couldn't concentrate on studying. Every shadow outside seemed to move. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. I kept the lights on and positioned myself where I could see all the windows from the couch. At 1:30 a.m., the tapping started again. This time it was on the front windows, moving systematically from left to right. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, not that I thought it would help against someone tapping on windows, but it made me feel marginally less helpless. The sound continued its circuit around the house. Living room windows, kitchen windows, dining room windows. When it reached the sliding door again, I forced myself to look. A woman stood at the edge of the light, just barely visible. She was pale, wearing what looked like a white nightgown that moved in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her hair hung long and dark around her face, and even from that distance I could see that she was crying. She raised one hand and tapped on the glass with her fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. Then she smiled, and I saw that half her face was missing. Not missing, caved in, like she'd been in some terrible accident. The left side of her skull was a dark hollow, and when she tilted her head, I could see straight through to the other side. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. not caring about the noise. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. She pressed her face against the glass, leaving a smear of something dark and wet. The security systems suddenly went haywire. Every sensor in the house triggered at once, the control panel flashing red and emitting a piercing alarm. The automated voice began its announcement. Security breach, front door, kitchen window, living room window, upstairs bedroom window, guest bedroom window. The list went on and on, every single sensor in the house detecting an intrusion simultaneously. I ran upstairs to check on the kids. Emma was sitting up in bed, crying and covering her ears against the alarm. But when I got to Jake's room, the chair was moved aside, and his door was open again. He wasn't in his bed. He wasn't in his room. And his window was open, the screen pushed out and hanging by one corner. I screamed his name, running to look out the window. The drop to the backyard was at least 12 feet, too high for a 4-year-old to survive uninjured. But there was no small body crumpled on the ground below. There was nothing. They searched for 3 hours. Brought in dogs, called additional units, even had a helicopter with spotlights circle the neighborhood. They questioned me extensively. What time did I last see Jake? Had there been any unusual phone calls? Did the Hendersons have any enemies? Was I sure I'd locked all the doors? I tried to tell them about the woman, about Jake's story of the sad lady, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. A babysitter who claimed to see a mysterious woman just before the child in her care vanished. It sounded like the setup for a made-for-TV movie. Jake's body was found 3 days later in the storm drain 6 blocks away. The medical examiner said he'd been dead for at least 48 hours, which was impossible because I'd been talking to him that night, carrying him in from the backyard, tucking him into bed. The official report blamed me for negligence, said I must have fallen asleep, that Jake had wandered outside and gotten lost in the storm system. The Hendersons sued me, my insurance company settled out of court, and I became the babysitter who lost a child. But I know what I saw. I know what happened that night. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at 2 a.m., I hear tapping on my windows, soft and rhythmic, like fingernails on glass. I don't look outside anymore. I can't bear to see if she's still looking for someone to play with. The police file says Jake drowned, but I know better. Some games don't end just because the sun comes up. My name is David, and I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving these highways for 15 years, seen every mile of asphalt between here and the Mexican border. You learn to love the solitude out there, the endless ribbon of road stretching into darkness, the hypnotic rhythm of wheels on pavement. But there are stretches of highway that feel different, places where the air seems thicker, where your radio picks up stations that shouldn't exist, where the normal rules don't quite apply. Most drivers know them. We don't talk about them much, just share quiet warnings at truck stops and rest areas. Avoid I-78 through Nevada after midnight. Don't stop at the Riverside Rest Area in Utah. If you see the woman in the red dress on Highway 50, don't pick her up. I always figured these were just stories, urban legends that drivers shared to break up the monotony. Until I found myself on State Route 375 at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March. I was running behind schedule, pushing hard to make my delivery in Reno by morning. The load was medical supplies, time-sensitive stuff that hospitals needed, the kind of cargo that justified bending the rules about mandatory rest periods. The dispatcher had offered double overtime, and I needed the money. SR 375 isn't a road you take by choice. It's a lonely stretch of two-lane highway that cuts through the heart of Nevada's high desert, the kind of place where you can drive for an hour without seeing another car. The locals call it the extraterrestrial highway because of all the UFO sightings reported out there. But the only thing alien about it is how isolated it makes you feel. My CB radio had been picking up nothing but static since Tonopah, and my GPS kept losing satellite signal. The landscape outside was just endless scrubland, punctuated by the occasional Joshua tree, everything painted silver by the full moon. I had maybe 3 hours of driving left, assuming I could maintain speed and didn't hit any construction zones. That's when I saw the hitchhiker. She was standing on the shoulder about half a mile ahead, her white dress clearly visible in my headlights. As I got closer, I could see she was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. She had her thumb out in the classic hitchhiker pose, but something about her posture seemed wrong, too stiff and formal. Every instinct told me to keep driving. You don't stop for strangers on a deserted highway at 2:30 a.m., especially not when you're carrying valuable cargo. But as I passed her, she turned to look at my truck, and I saw her face clearly in the side mirror. She was crying. Not the quiet tears of someone who'd been stranded for a while, but the desperate, body-shaking sobs of someone in real distress. And she looked so young, so vulnerable, standing there in the middle of nowhere, in nothing but a thin dress. I found myself pulling over, air brakes hissing as the truck came to a stop about 50 yards past her position. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching her in my mirror as she walked toward the truck. There was something strange about the way she moved, too smooth, like she was floating just above the asphalt. She appeared at my passenger window, and I rolled it down part way. "Thank you for stopping," she said, and her voice had an odd echo to it, like she was speaking from inside a cave. "I've been waiting so long." "Where are you trying to get to?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm headed north to Reno." "That's perfect," she said, and smiled. When she smiled, her teeth looked wrong, too many of them, too sharp. "I've been trying to get home for such a long time." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. She climbed into the cab with that same floating motion, settling into the seat without seeming to put any weight on it. Up close, I could see that her white dress wasn't quite white. It was stained with something dark around the hem and sleeves. "What's your name?" I asked as I put the truck in gear. "Mary," she said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Mary Catherine Walsh. I used to live in Reno a long time ago." I tried to make small talk as we drove, asked her how she'd gotten stranded, whether she had family in Reno, normal trucker conversation. But her answers were vague and disconnected, and she kept talking about how long she'd been trying to get home, how many people had passed her by without stopping. "The last driver who picked me up," she said, after about 30 minutes. "He was very nice. We talked for hours." "When was that?" She turned to look at me, and in the glow of the dashboard lights, I could see that her eyes were completely black, not just the irises, the entire eye, as if they were holes punched through her skull. 1987, she said. My blood went cold. I tried to keep my expression neutral, my hands steady on the wheel, but every alarm in my head was screaming. I reached for the CB radio, hoping to raise another driver, someone who could confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. The radio was dead. Not just quiet, the display was dark, like it had lost power entirely. "You know," Mary said conversationally, "I never made it home that night. The driver who picked me up, he had other ideas. He pulled off at one of those old mining roads, the kind that lead nowhere." I could feel her staring at me, but I didn't dare look away from the road. "He hurt me," she continued, her voice still eerily calm. "Hurt me very badly. Then he left me there in the desert, bleeding and alone. It took me 3 days to die. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop 20 degrees. I could see my breath forming small clouds, and frost began forming on the inside of the windshield, despite the heater running full blast. "That was 36 years ago," Mary said. "Do you know how long 36 years feels when you're trying to get home?" I pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb past the safe limit for the load I was carrying. The road ahead seemed to stretch infinitely into the darkness. No signs of civilization, no other headlights, just the endless desert and the thing sitting in my passenger seat. "I've ridden with a lot of drivers since then," she went on. "Nice men, mostly. Men with families waiting for them. Men who thought they were doing a good deed by helping a stranded girl." "What happened to them?" The words came out before I could stop them. Mary smiled again, and this time I could see that her mouth opened too wide, stretching beyond the normal limits of human anatomy. "They helped me practice getting home." I yanked the wheel hard to the right, steering the truck toward the shoulder at 70 miles per hour. The trailer started to jackknife, tires screaming against asphalt. For a moment I thought the whole rig would roll, crushing us both in a tangle of twisted metal. But when the truck finally came to a stop, in a cloud of dust and burning rubber, the passenger seat was empty. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the empty seat where Mary had been. There was no sign she'd ever been there. No depression in the cushion, no lingering scent, nothing. Just a faint outline of moisture on the window, where her breath should have fogged the glass. I checked the cargo. Everything was secure, undamaged. The CB radio crackled back to life, and my GPS found its signal again. According to the clock on the dashboard, I'd lost exactly 1 hour, though the drive from where I'd picked her up should have taken 30 minutes at most. I made my delivery on time, but I never drove SR 375 again. Started taking the long way around, adding hours to my route just to avoid that stretch of highway. Other drivers understood when I explained, Everyone has roads they won't travel, stories they don't like to tell. But sometimes when I'm driving through the desert late at night, I see her in my mirrors, standing on the shoulder of whatever highway I'm on, wearing that white dress, thumb extended toward the darkness, waiting for the next good Samaritan to stop and help her getting home. I don't stop anymore, and I always check my passenger seat twice before I start the engine. Some rides don't end when you reach your destination. My name is Jessica, and I moved into the Belmont Arms apartment complex 6 months ago. It seemed perfect. Affordable rent, close to downtown, and best of all, available immediately. In a city where decent housing gets snapped up within hours of hitting the market, finding a one-bedroom apartment that I could move into the same day felt like winning the lottery. I should have asked why it was available. The building was one of those grand old structures from the 1920s, all Art Deco details and hardwood floors that had character, if you could overlook the occasional plumbing issues and temperamental heating system. My apartment was on the 4th floor, 4B, with tall windows that let in beautiful natural light during the day and offered a view of the downtown skyline at night. The super, Mr. Kowalski, was a sweet old Polish man who'd been maintaining the building for 30 years. When he handed me the keys, I noticed he avoided looking directly at me, focusing instead on his worn clipboard. "In the problems, you call right away," he said, in his thick accent. "Don't try to fix things yourself." And he hesitated, then shook his head. "Just call if you need anything." I asked about the previous tenant. Casual curiosity, really. Had they been there long? Why did they move out? Mr. Kowalski's face went pale. "She don't move out. She die. Heart attack. Very sudden. Very sad." He wouldn't tell me anything else, just mumbled something about how these old buildings held on to things and shuffled away down the hall. The first few weeks were blissful. I loved having my own space after years of sharing cramped apartments with roommates. I'd gotten a promotion at work that made the rent affordable, and I threw myself into decorating, hitting up thrift stores and garage sales to furnish my new home. The apartment had some quirks. The bathroom door wouldn't stay closed unless you turned the handle just right. The kitchen faucet had a tendency to drip at random intervals, and sometimes the hardwood floors would creak in the middle of the night. Old building problems, nothing unusual. But there was one thing that bothered me from the beginning. The previous tenant had left behind a chair. It was positioned in the living room, facing the large window that looked out over the courtyard. Not an unusual place for a chair, except for the way it was positioned, angled slightly away from the window, as if someone had been sitting there watching not the view outside, but the interior of the apartment itself. The chair was old-fashioned, with a high back and worn velvet upholstery and deep burgundy. It looked expensive, the kind of antique piece that you'd find in an estate sale. When I asked Mr. Kowalski about it, he just shrugged and said I could keep it or get rid of it, whatever I wanted. I decided to keep it. It was actually quite comfortable, and it went well with the vintage aesthetic I was going for. I moved it to face the window properly and used it as a reading chair for the first month. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a hint of something floral and cloying, like perfume that had gone bad. I assumed it was coming from the chair itself, Maybe the previous owner had worn a particular scent that had soaked into the fabric over time. I tried airing out the apartment, using fabric freshener, even had the chair steam cleaned. The smell got stronger. By the second month, it was noticeable as soon as I walked into the apartment. Sweet and rotting at the same time, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I started keeping the windows open constantly, bought air purifiers, even considered having the heating ducts cleaned in case something had died in there. But the smell always seemed strongest around the chair. I was starting to think about getting rid of it when I came home from work one evening to find it had been moved. Not dramatically, just turned slightly, angled back toward its original position, facing into the room rather than toward the window. I stood in the doorway, keys still in my hand, staring at the chair and trying to remember if I'd moved it myself that morning. Maybe I'd bumped into it while vacuuming, nudged it out of position without realizing it. I pushed it back to face the window and didn't think about it again until the next evening, when I found it turned the wrong way again. This time I was certain I hadn't moved it. I took a picture with my phone, the chair facing the window, the lamp beside it, the small table with my coffee mug from that morning. Documentation in case I was losing my mind. The next day, the chair had moved again. Same position, angled into the room, but this time there was an indentation in the seat cushion, as if someone had been sitting there. I called Mr. Kowalski, asked if anyone else had keys to my apartment, maintenance workers maybe, or previous tenants who hadn't returned their copies. "Only me and you," he assured me. "No one else comes in. Why, is problem?" I didn't know how to explain without sounding crazy, so I just said I thought I'd heard someone in the apartment and wanted to make sure the locks were secure. "You change locks if you want, but no one has keys. Building very secure." That night, I decided to test my theory. I positioned the chair facing the window, took another photo, and set up my laptop to record video from across the room. If someone was getting into my apartment and moving furniture, I'd have evidence. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of creaking floorboards. Not the random settling noises I'd gotten used to, but the deliberate creak of someone walking across the living room. I lay in bed, barely breathing, listening to the soft footsteps moving back and forth. Back and forth, back and forth. Like someone pacing. I grabbed my phone, using its dim light to navigate to the bedroom door. Through the crack, I could see into the living room. The chair was occupied. A figure sat in the chair, silhouetted against the window. Elderly, wearing what looked like a long nightgown, with white hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead, staring at my bedroom door. I must have made some sound, a gasp maybe, or the phone slipping in my sweaty grip, because her head turned slightly toward me. Even in the darkness, I could see her smile. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then pushed my dresser against it for good measure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my apartment, an intruder. I'm locked in my bedroom. Are you safe right now? Can you see the intruder? I can hear them moving around. Please send someone quickly. The police arrived 12 minutes later. By then, the sounds had stopped, but I stayed locked in my bedroom until I heard the officers calling my name through the front door. When I finally emerged, the apartment was empty. The chair faced the window. The laptop showed nothing but an empty room for the entire night. The officers were professional, but skeptical. No signs of forced entry, nothing disturbed or stolen, no evidence that anyone had been there. They suggested I might have been dreaming, or perhaps stress from the recent move was causing anxiety that manifested as auditory and visual hallucinations. I checked the video file after they left. 8 hours of footage showing an empty living room and a chair that never moved. But at 3:17 a.m., there was a brief flicker, just a few frames where the image distorted, like interference from an old television. And for those few frames, the chair was occupied. I started sleeping with the lights on after that. The smell in the apartment grew stronger, so overpowering that I had to breathe through my mouth when I was home. I bought every air freshener and deodorizer I could find, but nothing helped. Friends stopped visiting. They complained about the smell, made excuses to cut their visits short. My sister came over once and left after 20 minutes, claiming she felt sick. "It smells like death in here," she said, not knowing how accurate that assessment was. 3 weeks later, I found the obituary. Margaret Walsh, age 73, longtime resident of the Belmont Arms apartment complex, died suddenly of a heart attack in her home. She was found by building maintenance after neighbors complained of a smell coming from apartment 4B. Miss Walsh was known for her devotion to her late mother's antique furniture and was often seen sitting by her window, watching over the building's courtyard. She is survived by no immediate family. The article was dated 3 months ago, 2 weeks before I'd moved in. The accompanying photo showed a woman with white hair pinned in an old-fashioned style, wearing a high-necked dress that looked like it could have been a nightgown. She was sitting in a burgundy velvet chair, the same chair that was now in my living room. I confronted Mr. Kowalski the next day, bringing a printout of the obituary. His face crumpled when he saw it. "I should have told you," he said, sinking into a chair in his cluttered office. "But nobody wants to rent apartment where someone die. Building owner, he say clean everything out, don't tell new tenant. Bad for business." "She died in that chair, didn't she?" He nodded miserably. "Neighbors, they complained about smell for 2 weeks before I go check. She was sitting there, watching the window like always. Heart just stopped. Doctor say probably been dead long time when we find her." "Why didn't you remove the chair with everything else?" "We try," he said, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Every time we take chair out of building, it come back. Moving truck, we load it up, drive away. Next morning, chair is back in apartment. We sell to antique dealer downtown. 3 days later, dealer calls, says someone stole chair from his shop, but chair is back upstairs." He looked up at me with tired, frightened eyes. "Chair wants to stay, and maybe she wants to stay too." I moved out the next week, forfeiting my security deposit and breaking my lease. I didn't care about the financial hit. I couldn't spend another night in that apartment, breathing that suffocating air, feeling those eyes watching me from across the room. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in my new place, I catch a whiff of that floral, rotting smell. And I wonder if some things are harder to leave behind than an old chair and a rent-controlled apartment. Yesterday, I got a call from Mr. Kowalski. Apartment 4B is available again if I'm interested. The last tenant only lasted 2 months. Chair is still there, he said sadly. Still waiting by window. I think maybe Miss Walsh, she gets lonely. Maybe she just looking for friend. I hung up without answering, but I kept the phone number.
My name is Alex, and I run a small recording studio out of the basement of my house. It's not much, just a control room and a live room, with decent acoustics and equipment good enough for local bands and voiceover work. Most of my clients are indie musicians or people recording audiobooks, the kind of work that pays the bills but doesn't make you rich. I prefer working at night. The neighborhood is quieter after dark. No lawnmowers or traffic noise bleeding into the recordings. Plus, musicians tend to be night owls anyway, so scheduling sessions from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. works out well for everyone. The client who called me in late February was different from my usual crowd. She said her name was Elena, and she wanted to record what she described as experimental audio pieces. Not music, exactly, but soundscapes and spoken word performances that she planned to release as a podcast series. Her voice on the phone was soft, almost whispery, with an accent I couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe, or possibly just an affectation. She spoke very precisely, choosing her words carefully, and there were long pauses between her sentences that made me wonder if the connection was cutting out.
I work best in complete isolation, she explained. No interruptions, no other people in the building. Just me and the recording equipment. Would this be possible? I assured her it wouldn't be a problem. My girlfriend Lisa was out of town visiting family, and I lived on a quiet residential street where the neighbors minded their own business. We scheduled a session for the following Tuesday at 11 p.m. Elena arrived exactly on time, which was unusual enough in my line of work to be noteworthy. Most musicians show up at least 30 minutes late, full of apologies about traffic or equipment problems. But at 11 p.m. sharp, I heard the doorbell ring. She was younger than I'd expected from her voice, maybe mid-20s, with long black hair and pale skin that seemed to glow under the porch light. She carried a small black case that looked like it might contain recording equipment or instruments, though she'd told me over the phone that she wouldn't need anything beyond what I already had. "Thank you for accommodating my schedule," she said, as I led her down to the basement studio. "I know working this late is unusual." "Not for me," I said. "I'm a bit of a night owl myself." The studio felt different with her in it, smaller somehow, and the air seemed thicker. I chalked it up to having a new client. Sometimes the dynamic changes when you're working with someone for the first time, especially someone as intense as Elena seemed to be. I ran through the basic setup, showed her how the talkback system worked so she could communicate with me from the live room, explained the monitoring situation, and asked about her technical requirements. "I'll need about 4 hours," she said, "possibly longer. And once we begin, I'd prefer not to be interrupted. The material I'm recording is delicate. It requires complete concentration." I nodded and fired up the computer, loading a fresh session and checking levels on the microphones. Standard procedure, though something about Elena's presence was making me feel on edge. She moved around the live room like she was familiar with it, checking the acoustic panels and testing the feel of the space. "This will work perfectly," she said through the talkback. "The acoustics here are quite good, very absorbent." At 11:30, we started recording. Elena's first piece was unlike anything I'd ever heard. She spoke in what sounded like multiple languages. Some I recognized as Latin or possibly Greek, others that didn't sound like any human language at all. Her voice layered over itself in impossible ways, harmonizing with tracks that hadn't been recorded yet, creating complex rhythms and tonal patterns that made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on the technical aspects. Levels were good, no clipping, the room tone was clean. But there was something hypnotic about her performance. The words seemed to bypass my conscious mind and sink directly into some deeper part of my brain, the part that still remembered being afraid of the dark. After about 40 minutes, she stopped abruptly. "How did that sound?" she asked through the talkback. I realized I'd been staring at the recording meters without really seeing them, lost in the strange cadence of her voice. "Good," I said, though I wasn't sure that was accurate. "Do you want to hear a playback?" "Not necessary. Let's continue." The second piece was worse. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it filled the room with sound, as if the words themselves were expanding to occupy every available space. She spoke about loneliness, about waiting, about the hunger that comes from being separated from everything you once knew. I found myself thinking about my ex-girlfriend Sarah, who died in a car accident 3 years ago. We'd broken up months before the crash, ended things badly over my refusal to move in together, but I'd never stopped loving her. Never stopped regretting the way I'd handled things. Elena's voice seemed to know this somehow, weaving Sarah's name into the strange languages she spoke, describing details about our relationship that no one else knew. The fight we'd had over dinner at that Italian place downtown. The way she used to steal my t-shirts and wear them to bed. The last thing she'd said to me before slamming the door. "You'll regret this someday, Alex. You'll wish you could take it all back." By 1:30 a.m., I was having trouble focusing on the recording. The basement felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to press in around me. The air was thick and hard to breathe, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Elena showed no signs of fatigue. If anything, she seemed to be gaining strength as the night went on, her voice becoming more commanding, more present. During breaks between pieces, she would stand motionless in the live room, not drinking water or checking her phone like normal clients, just standing there, staring at the glass that separated us. "Are you getting all of this?" she asked during one break. I checked the recording levels. Everything looked normal on the computer screen, but when I tried to scrub through what we'd already recorded, the playback was just silence. Hours of session time showing waveforms on the screen, but no audio coming through the monitors. "There might be a technical problem," I said. "The levels look good, but I'm not getting any playback." Elena smiled, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely pleased. "That's perfectly normal," she said. "This kind of material doesn't always translate well to digital formats. We'll need to record it directly to tape." I didn't have tape equipment, hadn't used analog recording in years. But Elena opened her black case and pulled out a portable reel-to-reel recorder, something that looked like it belonged in a 1960s radio station. "This will capture everything perfectly," she assured me. "Much better fidelity for this type of work." I should have said no. Should have ended the session, refunded her money, and asked her to leave. But there was something compelling about Elena, something that made it difficult to refuse her requests. I found myself helping her set up the tape machine, running cables I didn't remember seeing her bring in. The third recording session began at 2:15 a.m. This time, Elena's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just the live room, but from the walls themselves, from the ceiling, from inside my own head. She spoke about crossing over, about the thin places where one world touches another, about the people who get lost in between. I tried to focus on the tape machine, watching the reels turn slowly in the dim light of the control room. But Elena's words were pulling me deeper into something I didn't understand, a place where time moved differently and the rules of normal reality didn't apply. I thought about Sarah again, but this time the memories felt more real than they should have. I could smell her perfume, hear her laugh, feel the weight of her head on my shoulder as we watched late-night movies on the couch. For a moment, I was convinced she was in the room with me, standing just outside my peripheral vision. "Alex!" I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty control room and Elena in the live room, speaking her strange words into the microphone. "Alex, can you hear me?" The voice was coming through the headphones, but it wasn't Elena. It was Sarah's voice, exactly as I remembered it, soft and slightly hoarse the way it got when she was tired. "I've been trying to reach you," Sarah's voice continued. "I've been waiting for someone to open the door, to make the connection. Elena helped me find you." I pulled off the headphones, but Sarah's voice continued, now coming from the studio monitors. "I never got to tell you I was sorry," she said, "about the fight, about the things I said. I never got to tell you that I loved you, that I wanted to try again." I looked through the glass at Elena, who had stopped speaking into the microphone. She was staring directly at me, smiling that same pleased expression. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Elena asked, though her lips didn't move. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "A chance to speak with her again, to make things right?" The temperature in the control room dropped suddenly, my breath forming clouds in the air. Frost began forming on the inside of the glass, but through it I could see that the live room was unchanged, still warm and comfortable. "Alex, come closer," Sarah's voice pleaded. "I can't stay long. Elena can only hold the connection for a little while." I stood up from the mixing board, drawn toward the glass that separated the control room from the live room. Elena was no longer visible, but somehow the space beyond the glass looked different, larger, filled with a soft, welcoming light. "Just step through," Sarah's voice said. "It's easy. Just step through the glass and we can be together again." I reached out toward the glass, and my hand passed through it like it was made of water. The surface rippled around my fingers, and I could feel warmth emanating from the other side. "That's it," Sarah whispered. "Come home, Alex. Come home to me." I was halfway through the glass when I heard another voice, my own voice recorded hours earlier during the session setup. "Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. This is Alex, recording session for Elena, Tuesday night. The sound of my own voice snapped me back to reality. I yanked my hand back from the glass, which was suddenly solid again, and stumbled backward into the mixing board. Elena was back in the live room, but she looked different now. Her skin was translucent, and I could see the wall behind her through her body. Her eyes had gone completely black, and when she smiled, her mouth opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. "So close," she said, and her voice had lost all pretense of humanity. "You were so close to crossing over. Sarah was so excited to see you again." The tape machine was still running, reels spinning, but now they were moving backward, unwinding everything we'd recorded. As the tape reversed, I could hear all of Elena's words again, but played in reverse, they sounded like screaming. I lunged for the power switch and shut down everything: the tape machine, the computers, the mixing board. The sudden silence was deafening after hours of Elena's hypnotic voice. When I looked up, the live room was empty. I found Elena's payment, cash in an envelope, exactly the amount we'd agreed upon, sitting on the mixing board. But there was no sign that she'd ever been in the studio, no impressions in the carpet where she'd stood, no fingerprints on the microphone, nothing. The tape session files on my computer were corrupted, just white noise and digital artifacts. But the tape machine still had the reel Elena had brought, and when I tried to play it back, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Sarah's voice, recorded years ago when I'd helped her practice for a presentation at work. The last recording I'd made of her before she died. But mixed in with Sarah's familiar words were other voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering the same thing over and over. "Come home, Alex, come home to us." I destroyed the tape that night, burned it in the backyard fire pit until nothing remained but ash and twisted plastic. But I kept the envelope full of cash, and sometimes late at night when I'm alone in the studio, I count the bills again. There are always more than there should be. And sometimes when I'm working on a session and the live room is empty, I catch a glimpse of movement through the glass, someone standing in the shadows, waiting patiently for me to notice them, waiting for me to step through. I don't record at night anymore.
5 stories, 5 accounts of people who found themselves alone in the dark, facing something that shouldn't exist. Marcus, still hearing footsteps in his bedroom at 2 a.m. Sarah, carrying the weight of a child who vanished while in her care. David, checking his mirrors for hitchhikers who died decades ago. Jessica, wondering if some attachments are stronger than death itself. And Alex, who learned that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. Each of them tried to return to normal life, to convince themselves that what they experienced was just stress, just exhaustion, just their imagination playing tricks in the darkness. But we know better, don't we? We know that some encounters leave marks that never fade, scars that ache when the barometric pressure drops and the shadows grow long. The world is full of thin places, moments when the familiar becomes foreign and the safe becomes dangerous. They happen in empty office buildings and suburban backyards, on lonely highways and in basement studios.
They happen when we're alone, when our defenses are down, when the rational mind that protects us during daylight hours finally admits it doesn't have all the answers. These stories came to me through various channels: emails from listeners, messages on social media, letters slipped under my door with no return address. I can't verify their authenticity, can't promise you that every detail is exactly as it happened, but I can tell you this: the fear in these accounts is real. The desperation to be believed, to share the burden of impossible experiences with someone who won't immediately dismiss them as fantasy, that's authentic. So the next time you find yourself alone in the dark, remember Marcus and Sarah and David and Jessica and Alex. Remember that the darkness holds more than just the absence of light. And if you hear footsteps when no one else is home, if you see figures that security cameras can't capture, if you feel watched by eyes that shouldn't exist, well, maybe you'll understand why nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m. Sleep tight.